Hello, I'm Tenny, and this is Not Defined by Endo. If you or someone you know and love has been diagnosed or is suffering from symptoms of endometriosis, then this podcast is dedicated to you. Each episode, I share my own experiences, interview health professionals and other specialists, and speak to those who know what it feels like to live with and fight an incurable disease. Please remember that I am not a health professional, so please always speak to your healthcare professional before making any changes to your lifestyle or diet. On this note, let's begin. Imagine if you could send a sample of urine to your doctor and immediately find out if you have endometriosis. This would drastically reduce the appalling diagnosis times, am I right? Well, let's speak to Barbara Guinn today and hear all about EndoTect, a project she's currently working on with the University of Hull to detect endometriosis using urine samples. Hello, Barbara. Thank you so much for coming on the show today.
Hi, thanks, Taniola. I really appreciate it.
The first time I saw something about EndoTect on Twitter, I was so excited. I was like, what is this new study and what is this about? Because we all know how difficult it is to diagnose endometriosis and how long it takes for people to go from experiencing their symptoms to diagnosis. So this is a really exciting one for me today. So I'll start with my first question. Can you please let the audience know today who you are, what you do, and how you got involved in this project?
Okay, my name is Barbara Guinn. I'm a reader in biomedical sciences at the University of Hull, and I am based in the Hull York Medical School. So I did a PhD in haematology, and completely different from endometriosis. I was interested in mutations in genes and how they cause disease. And then I worked in Canada for 4.5 years. And I did postdocs on gene therapy and another postdoc looking at modifying tumour cells to make the immune system kill them. I came back and worked at King's College London, and there I set up my own research group, and we were looking for proteins that we could use to develop vaccines against cancer. I worked in Southampton for a while, and then I went to the University of Bedfordshire, and in 2016 I came to the University of Hull. So my background and interest has been in haematology, in leukemia. But in 2010, I wanted to sort of spread my wings a little bit. And I was very interested in ovarian cancer. It's a difficult to treat disease, and it desperately needs some new treatments to help improve things. And what we'd found was that the proteins that are unique to tumour cells that allow us to develop vaccines and target them, they have to only be present in the tumour cell. But that also means they're a really good biomarker. And one of the targets that we found in ovarian cancer is a really good biomarker for early ovarian cancer. And so we're studying that at the moment. And one of my colleagues said to me, why don't you work on endometriosis? You know, it's desperately in need of some biomarkers. And so we started a project looking at endometriosis. And we had a fantastic PhD student called Leah Cooksey. And Leah's been working, looking at the literature. Because of COVID, we had to change our focus and go very much more desk-based. And Leah was working to look what has been done before. And it's quite a different way for a lot of us lab scientists to work. Instead of just jumping in the lab and getting on with it, we were sitting at the desk and going, well, what's been done before and what can we add to it? And then we started to look at patient samples. Are these proteins present in the urine? Are they uniquely expressed by people with endometriosis? And so that's how we've ended up where we are.
Wow. It's so interesting to see how you came into endometriosis, because endometriosis is usually looked at as less important, if you know what I mean. I had someone say to me, you should be grateful it's not cancer, which of course I'm grateful that it isn't. but it sometimes makes endometriosis less important to people.
Yeah.
So it's really interesting. And I'm sure the endometriosis community is very grateful to you for, coming into this world and trying to make a difference.
I was just going to say there's so little funding for endometriosis research. I know that there are some great charities that are supporting endometriosis work, and a lot of them, like Endometriosis UK, are looking at the stats and supporting people who have endometriosis, which is really important. And then we have some new charities that have been set up, such as the Endometriosis Foundation, that's looking at diet more. But that lab-based research that we do, it's very difficult to get funding to do the work. And at the moment, I found some funding with the NIHR, which is the National Institute for Health Research in the UK, pairing up with Wellbeing of Women, and also some MRC funding. But other than that, it's just so difficult. So one of the things that we have been doing is sort of some local fundraising to try and get a little bit of money to support our work while we generate preliminary data and then go for these bigger grants that are available.
Yes, this is one of the big issues with endometriosis. Like you said, it's underfunded, which makes it
Yeah.
under-researched. And this is why what you're doing and what you're trying to do and the study you're working on is pretty important. So I want to talk a bit more about the actual study, EndoTect. And do you believe that I found you on Twitter? I put in the hashtag endometriosis like I usually do just to see who's talking about endo. And then I saw EndoTect and I was like, interesting. What's this about? And I saw you and then, of course, reached out to you. So let's talk a bit more about the study. What exactly, I know you've explained briefly that it's about looking at the proteins in urine and trying to figure out if it's a biomarker for endometriosis, but can you elaborate on that a bit more? What exactly are you looking for? What kinds of participants do you expect to be in the study? Where have you gotten so far? I just want to know everything.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. I would as well. I'd be like, go on, tell me more. So at the moment, we've been really fortunate. We received a European Association for Cancer Research Novosanis Award, and Novosanis have been very generous and provided us with their Colli P tubes. And so these are a bit like FemiP. They're like a funnel that you can pee in, and it just
Oh,
makes it a lot easier. And also, when
interesting.
the tube is filled up with wee, any excess comes out the side of the tube into the toilet. And so the benefit of this is we can get first void of
Right.
urine. And so some of the things that we need to do with EndoTect now is look to see what time of day, what time of the month, whether first void or mid void is better, and look at lots of different options. What we found is that we can differentiate between women with deep endometriosis and superficial endometriosis. So this means we can identify the people who should be going for a laparoscopy, who need that as part of their treatment because they have deep endometriosis. And probably the next step would be something like an ultrasound. I've already had a chat with the GP about your symptoms, and then they would refer you off to a specialist for further investigations. If you have superficial endometriosis, then the best treatments for you are actually things like the pill, intrauterine devices, and treatments that are actually to do with stopping you from getting pregnant. And the problem with that is lots of people who have endometriosis would like to have children. And so it's not ideal, but it's a first step in the process of just getting people to the right place in a timely fashion. Because I think the problem at the moment is it's taking 8 years for people to get referred to a specialist, lots of visits to the GP, lots of pain. And certainly during COVID, a lot of the endometriosis clinics were shut down and prioritization was given to the cancer patient. And now we're seeing patients with endometriosis with much worse symptoms, much worse disease than they would have had COVID not happened. So we know that endometriosis gets worse the longer you have it. And so hopefully if we can get people to the right place in a timely fashion, they have less symptoms and less problems. They'll get treated when it's easier to treat.
Yeah, you're right. It's really important to, of course, diagnose pretty quickly. And another thing that I think your study will potentially help with, if it's successful, is that a lot of the times at the moment, the gold standard for diagnosis is laparoscopic surgery. And of course, that has its pros and cons because as much as we want quick diagnosis so that treatment can start, we also want to maybe have a better way of knowing if someone has endometriosis before going in there, because a lot of the doctors go in and say this is just a diagnostic surgery, but it's actually still surgery and it's a big deal. So I think this is quite important. So
Yeah.
you mentioned that you already saw from preliminary findings that there's a difference in those samples between those that have superficial endometriosis and deep infiltrating endometriosis. Do you know if there's also a difference between those that don't have endometriosis at all? Are you able to find that information out? Or is it right now just if they have endo, all we can do is compare how bad it is? Or can we say there's no endo at all or there's endo? How is that going
Yeah.
so far?
So we've now collected 156 samples from endometriosis patients, and that large cohort gives us an opportunity to split patients into different subgroups. So we can split patients into those with deep and those with superficial endometriosis, and then we can start to split patients based on where they are in the menstrual cycle and also what treatments they're having. So it's a lot of patient samples. All of those patients have been seen in the endometriosis centre at Castle Hill Hospital. They've all been treated by our consultant surgeons who work in the endometriosis centre. So Jane Allen runs it and Keith Cunningham works with her. And prior to them, it was Kevin Phillips. So we've had these amazing clinicians who have been diagnosing all our patients. We've got consistency across the range. At the moment, we've only looked at patients with endometriosis to see how the test works. And what we're doing at the moment, my job in all of this, as I'm not a clinician, has been to collect the healthy donor samples. And so as of this week, we've collected about 52 healthy donor samples. And again, we're looking at time of the month. We're looking at what hormones people are taking, so that we can directly compare to see how does that affect the test. So at the moment, a lot of patients being tested, but the next phase is to look at healthy donors.
Amazing. At the moment, do you need more participants in the study? Will you benefit from that, or do you have enough people that you're now working on the data?
We're now working on testing all of the urines that we've collected. So I have a few more people that I'm talking to about being healthy donors. But at the moment, I think we're taking a bit of a breather. We're just going to have a look at what the results look like and see where we need to focus our attention. Because if we need more healthy donors who are on contraception or more healthy donors who aren't, then that's where we'll focus our energy. The test at the moment is costing us about £30 per person. So it's cheap, but it's not cheap when you're doing hundreds of samples. And then, of course, there's all the other work that goes around that as well.
Yeah. So you've talked about the cost of this study, and we've also spoke about earlier how we have barriers to funding. How do you think we could raise more awareness and get access to this funding? Because there is funding, it's just where the money is going, right?
Yeah, there's definitely money. And there's lots of people who are super keen to help, who really want to do something to make a difference. And I think that if there was, a charity that said we focus on endometriosis research and we're going to help make a difference, that would be phenomenal. So at the moment, what I've been doing is it all started about 3 or 4 years ago. I started selling spider plants on the wall outside my house, and I sell them for about 10p each. And we just raised a little bit of money. And then one of my neighbours gave me some other plants to sell. And then my mum gave me some of her art to sell. And so what you'll see on Twitter is all these pictures of all the art on the wall. And so between my mum and I, we've raised over £1,600 for endometriosis research at the University of Hull. And all of the money that we're given goes straight into a charity account at the university, so we can access it for the lab work. But I, whenever possible, don't touch it. And then we've had donations from other events. The Yellow Ball was organised by the Endo group, so Hull and East Yorkshire Endometriosis Support Group. They can be found on Facebook. There's lots of support groups for endometriosis, people who suffer with endometriosis, and they're often on Facebook. Absolutely phenomenal, supporters of other women, other people with endometriosis. And they raised over £5,000 through having an endometriosis ball at the end of March, and gave us £3,000 towards our research, which is just phenomenal. It makes such a huge difference. And at the moment, we work on a very tight budget, so we're incredibly efficient. Every decision we make is, we sit there and very carefully think out exactly where we can get the most results. But I continue to, look for places that we can apply for more support, so that we can get these sort of big grants. And we were very lucky that the University of Hull awarded us £54,000 for our research. And now we've got a part-time technician, a part-time research nurse, and money. We bought a -80 freezer that cost us £8,500. So now we've got somewhere to store all of our samples safely. And then we have more money to actually run some of the tests. So that's going to make a huge difference to what we can do.
Yeah, that's impressive. It's exciting to see the way the community has come together. So like you said, you doing things like yourself, like selling spider plants with your mom, and the university giving some money, and then the charities and communities. It's great to see that everyone's pitching in and everyone's trying to make a difference, because it's really, really important. And every time I do anything with regards to raising awareness, I just think of the little ones, the younger girls that are, growing up and maybe are beginning to have painful periods. And I'm like, we're working, don't worry, we're working, we're hoping that we can get to you quicker. But so, well done. Thank you very much for that. I have one more question with regards to the study, or the results from the study. So if you're successful, I think the question also is usually how to pass this research and this information to maybe medical technology firms and companies that will motivate the industry to produce equipment, for urine testing, make this available to girls and women on a larger scale. So how do you think that we can pass this information or this research? How do we bridge that gap between the research world and the business world, if that makes sense?
Yeah, we're already talking to companies who have different ways of offering tests like these out in the public domain. So we're just talking to a few companies about how that might happen. So there's certainly lots of interest, which has been great. And hopefully we'll find, partners that we can work with that will help get this out into the public domain. I've had lots of women get in touch with me. I was on BBC Radio Humberside and also on BBC Breakfast News talking about our research. And after that, we had over 200 emails from women, predominantly with endometriosis, saying, thank you for the work you do. How can we help you? And please let me use the test. And so,
we're desperate.
Yeah, absolutely. I don't care what it takes. Please let me have a test. And I think it is desperate. When you're in pain, you're being told by the doctors perhaps that they don't think it's endometriosis, and yet deep down you think it is. And it's incredibly frustrating, because although laparoscopy is the gold standard for diagnosis, now it's not actually being recommended. So if the clinicians think that someone has superficial endometriosis, they're no longer recommending a laparoscopy, because that comes with its own risks. So a laparoscopy for deep endometriosis, where it will be part of the treatment, and that's been quite a big shift. It might be worth people looking at the NICE guidelines for diagnosis of endometriosis, so that they understand what they should be able to expect from their GP when they see them.
Yeah, I mean, it's like you said, a double-edged sword. The laparoscopy, especially when it's just for diagnosis. I've always thought this is a bit drastic to just go in to find out, but I also knew that, especially according to the NICE guidelines before the change, that it was the gold standard, and that's the only way to truly know if you have endometriosis, by looking in there, getting a biopsy and testing. But yeah, if we can have even just something that is a marker that says you have and with, in addition to other things, because I think what's important as well is, now that I know about endometriosis, sometimes I know that I'm not a doctor, but I'm like, okay, tell me what you're going through, and I can almost piece things together. Of course, that's just like from a patient's perspective thing, and we really have to listen to our patients as well. But then having your tool as well, which would be, okay, now let's go medical and let's test and see if we have these markers, and we can say, okay, on a scale of 1 to 10 or a prediction, we think that 80% you have endometriosis. I think it's going to be a game changer for endometriosis patients. So thank you very much for all the work you're doing. And I have one final question. For anyone listening today, what would you want them to take away from this conversation today?
We need to push hard to get the government and charities to fund research, lab-based research into endometriosis. We need to tip the balance, because I think historically and still currently, more research, clinical research, is done on men. And part of that is because men do not have the hormone fluctuations that women do. I think, medicine has been a male-dominated environment for a very long time. And now we look at our medical students, and the majority are female. There's definitely that shift there, and it's time for us to say, okay, the basis of a disease, now look at it in women. Now start looking at women's health. 1.6% of all funding in the UK goes towards, reproductive health, which affects 16% of people. Endometriosis affects 1 in 10 people. That's 196 million people worldwide affected by endometriosis. And we still don't have a good way to diagnose it except with laparoscopy. And so, unfortunately, as other diseases before us, we need funding to make a difference. And there are some amazing research groups in the UK and worldwide who work on endometriosis. And we'd all really appreciate a bit more funding so we can get on with this, and make a difference.
Yeah, thank you so much, Barbara. It's been a pleasure speaking to you today. And I wish you all the best with the project, and I'll keep in touch, and I'll also keep myself updated on the project. But thank you so much.
Okay, thank you so much. It's been a real pleasure.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Not Defined by Endo. You can learn more about the EndoTect project by following Barbara on Twitter at The Chatty Scientist. If you enjoyed this episode, please share, rate, and subscribe to this podcast for more episodes like this. Till next time, remember, you are not defined by endo.